and in an unimaginably cruel twist of fate, Peregrine Massey actually gives birth at the stake whilst being burnt alive. You alright mate, how's it going? Today we're going to talk about British folklore and urban legends. These are folktales that take place within Britain and Ireland. Being from the UK, you would think I'd know a few of these, but being that Britain has such a rich and long history, some of these stories are news to me. So we'll start off with some of the more popular folktales, and as the video goes on, things will get a bit more obscure and dark, and you probably haven't heard of a few of these coming up. Also, later in the video, I'm going to be trying some British food and telling you the culture behind it, so let's get into things, shall we? First up, we'll start off with someone that you probably know, Robin Hood. And yes, Robin Hood is an urban legend. Apparently, he did not exist, or at least the tales that we're told about him did not happen. But if you don't know him, Robin Hood was an archer who lived in Sherwood Forest within Nottinghamshire, sometimes even being known as Robin of Sherwood. So the general claims of his character would be that he would steal from the rich of the country and give what he stole to the poor, being somewhat of a benevolent criminal. Now, records of his stories date back to the 13th century, so the 1200s, but it's thought that he was born sometime around 1160, meaning that he would have been active around the time of Richard I. Generally, within his stories you have a few recurring characters such as his love Maid Marian, his band of merry men, and his enemies the Sheriff of Nottingham and King John. It was said that Robin Hood was a supporter of Richard I, otherwise known as Richard the Lionheart. I don't have a tremendous ton to say about this dude. They made movies about him if you want to find more out about his character. Let's move on to something that you might not know. Redcap is thought to be a murderous goblin who is thought to inhabit the abandoned castles near the English-Scottish border. It's theorised that he especially prefers to live in castles in which there were scenes of tyranny or wicked deeds that occurred there. Not exactly sure why, maybe he gets off in it or something, but hey, I'm not going to judge. What I will judge though is the fact that legend states that the reason Redcap is called Redcap is because after he kills his victims, he soaks his cap in the victim's blood. Now, what's interesting to me about Redcap is the reason that his story was created in the first place, because it actually has some historical relevance to it. I'm going to say that back in the day, people were more willing to suspend their disbelief about the paranormal, and during the wars of Scottish independence in the early 1300s, many Englishmen and Scots would travel to the other side of the border to wreak havoc on the land and people. So, some civilians created the legend of Redcap to scare rampant raiders. A being with long, unkempt hair, red eyes, thin fingers with nails like talons and long teeth, and a being that loves to throw large stones at his victims, further attacking them with his pike staff and taking no remorse in his evil actions. Very brutal, very British. Okay, I'm going to play a little game with you guys right now. Where do you think I'm from based solely on my accent? Anyone from the UK or anyone abroad can guess, but please leave your guess down in the comments. I'd be really interested to hear, because I get told by a lot of Southerners that I sound Northern, and by a lot of Northerners that I sound Southern. Where do you think I'm from? So this next tale is one of my favourite that I've ever researched. It brings together history, war, mythology, all of it to create a fantastic story centred around a drum owned by Sir Francis Drake. So to understand this story, let me fill you in on who Sir Francis Drake was. Sir Francis Drake was the first Englishman to complete a voyage completely around the world, and this expedition took place between 1577 and 1580 in what would sow the seeds for Britain's domination of the seas over Spain and Portugal. He was also a naval officer, being the second in command of the English fleet in the victorious battle against the Spanish Armada in 1588. Now, throughout the entirety of his journeys in the human world, Sir Francis Drake brought with him a snare drum. For the life of me, I can't actually find out why. I guess he just liked it. He would die in 1596 of dysentery, but before he did, he ordered that his beloved drum that he still had by his side after years of expeditions would be taken to Buckland Abbey, a large manor house that he had purchased years earlier, just north of Plymouth in Devon. Now, this is where things get mythological, because he vowed before he died that if Great Britain were ever in impending danger, that if someone were to beat the drum, he would somehow, some way, gain the powers to influence the tide of war and return from heaven to defend his country. Now, something you need to know about us Brits, right, is that we're a warrior race. We haven't been conquered for 1,000 years. So stupid. But seriously, we haven't been conquered for 1,000 years. Our island nation has stood up to some of the toughest forces the world has ever seen. but there have been many times where war didn't look too good for us. For example, many claim that during the Napoleonic Wars, some could hear the drum making a noise. Then, when war was officially declared on the Central Powers, some claim it once again rang aloud. More recently, many claim that they could hear the loud beating of Drake's drum when British troops were being evacuated from Dunkirk in World War II. Eventually though, the tides of war in each of these conflicts would change, and in the end, each were decisive victories for the Brits. Could it be that the legend of Drake's drum changed the morale of British troops? It could be, or maybe if we were to suspend our disbelief for a moment maybe, just maybe, some more supernatural events may have occurred that had an impact on these dark times. In the past, you could have gone up to Buckland Abbey to see Drake's drum, but in recent years they've moved it to a climate-controlled location to keep it safe, and a replica has now taken its place. You never know when Great Britain will need it to begin beating again. We're actually sticking in Devon for this next tale, and this piece of folklore is almost more of a phenomenon than anything. This fascinating story dates all the way back to 1855 in East and South Devon. This is the Devil's Footprints. So, a little fact about the UK. I don't know if it's the same for the rest of the world, but it snows the most in the first few months of the year, and February in particular is the most likely month for it to snow over here. Back in early February 1855, the UK suffered from heavy snowfall, and the next day, people woke up in Devon to find upwards of 100 miles of hoof tracks. Now, some think that this was the devil's footprints, because if you look at interpretations of the devil, many people say that he has cloven hooves. The problem, if you want to debunk the paranormal and claim that this was simply a horse, was that there was no way that a single horse would have been able to walk 100 miles in a single night, considering the tracks did not indicate that this being was running. And since the majority of these tracks came in the form of a single file line, today we still have no conclusive answers as to what happened. There are many suggestions that other animals had something to do with it, animals including wood mice, kangaroos and badgers, but some people think that the most logical answer was that for a single night, back 150 or so years ago, the devil himself walked among the people of Devon. In my Mexican folklore video, there was a house that had a tale dedicated to it that you could go and see in real life. And the same can be said for the Lincoln Imp, in a kind of sort of way. The Lincoln Imp is a creature said to be sent up to Earth by Satan himself, and he was turned to stone, and you can actually visit this stone monument if you go to the Lincoln Cathedral. So if you're travelling to England and for some ungodly reason you somehow find yourself in Lincoln, you might actually want to visit the Lincoln Imp, which has been a symbol of the city. This legend dates back all the way to the 14th century, and the tale goes that two mischievous creatures called imps were sent by Satan himself to do his bidding on Earth. After causing mayhem in northern England, the two imps headed to the Lincoln Cathedral, where they smashed tables and chairs, even going as far as harassing humans because they decked the bishop. Yeah, the bishop was in at the cathedral at the time, and the imps gave him the old left-right good night. The forces of good soon came to put an end to this madness, however, as soon it's said that an angel came out of a book of hymns and told them to stop. The legend goes on to say that one of the imps was brave and started throwing rocks at the angel, but the other imp cowered under the broken tables and chairs at the sight of God's creature. Not taking any of his shit, the angel turned the first imp to stone, but was more merciful to the second, giving the second imp a chance to escape. And it's said that even on still days, it's always windy around the cathedral because the second imp is circling around the building looking for his friend. Although that might just be classic English weather, so we'll have to get back to you on that one. Now, there is a continuation of this story actually. I'm not sure if it's entirely canon, but some people believe that the second imp escaped and travelled to nearby Grimsby, where he entered St James's Church and began knocking about. And I kid you not, the Wikipedia article I saw says, and I quote, "The angel reappeared and gave the imp's backside a good thrashing before turning it to stone as it had the first imp in Lincoln." So what you're telling me is that an angel materialised out of thin air, grabbed an imp sent to Earth by Satan himself, bent him over his knee and started spanking the living hell out of him. Literally the living hell out of him. The funniest thing to me about this is that the angel had the option just to turn the imp to stone, but instead it decided to give it one last humiliation before doing it anyway. Quick one here, the Cerne Abbas giant is a hill figure that can also be located in real life. You can actually go to this one. So it's located in Dorset, which for those of you who don't know is in the southwest of England. I've actually got quite a few from around this area. It stands at a magnificent 55 metres or 180 feet high, and the earliest theorised records of it date all the way back to the late 17th century, but some people think that it could date back as far as 1,000 years old. Now, the reason why this one stood out to me is, how do I put this delicately? His massive knob. Wikipedia describes the hill figure as a standing nude male with a prominent erection wielding a large club in its right hand. So you might be wondering, why did someone hundreds of years ago make a hill figure with a 10-foot blind bob? Good question. In actuality, we don't know much about who made this thing or even what it represents. Some people think that it's meant to be a Saxon deity, others believe that it's meant to be a Romano-British figure, but one thing is for sure, this thing has one big todger. Now, explanations of this may vary, and they're going to get very mature very fast, so please, any minors, skip ahead. So one explanation is that there was actually a giant that came over to England, and this was the outlining of its corpse after being slayed by the townspeople. They actually beheaded it, so the tale goes. And some other people believe that it's here to represent fertility, and if a woman were to sleep on the hill figure, she will become extremely fertile. Additionally, and I'm not recommending this by the way, this is not my opinion, if a couple were to engage in the devil's tango on the hill figure, it's said that they would become extremely fertile together. So much that this could actually cure infertility, the legend says, especially if you get your oats on his twig and berries, if you know what I mean. If you have it off on his meat and two veg. If you get down to it on his dickory dock. This video is getting demonetized, isn't it? Next up on my list of popular British folklore characters is the Black Shuck, a legend most commonly told in Norfolk and Suffolk in East Anglia. Now, while he might look like a cute little puppy, someone you might call a good boy, the Black Shuck could not be further from that, with the name Shuck actually translating from the Old English word meaning devil or fiend, and there are actually a few people that claim the first reported sighting of this creature goes as far back as 1127. Some say that the Black Shuck is quite a large dog, but some descriptions of the animal state that he could be as large as a small horse or calf. So what are the claims of the Black Shuck? Why should we be afraid of it? Well, for one, this thing is an omen of death, it's horrible luck, but that's not even the kicker, because while that's bad in itself, the actual legend is a bit darker. Remember just a minute ago when I said the dog's name comes from the word that translates to devil? Well, this hound is especially known for targeting churchgoers and pious people. The most famous account of this dates back to Abraham Fleming's telling of the story all the way back in the 1500s, 1577 to be precise, whereby on the 4th of August that year at Blybrugh, the Black Shuck is said to have burst through the doors of the Holy Trinity Church to a clap of thunder. He ran up past a large congregation, killing a man and a boy and causing the church steeple to collapse through the roof. As the dog departed the church, he left scorch marks on the north door which can be seen at the church to this very day. Now, perhaps this story has been exaggerated over the years. Perhaps there was just a stray aggressive dog, or maybe even a wolf or something that just so happened to run into the church and attack people. But if we suspend our disbelief for a moment, why can't the Black Shuck be something more supernatural? Even if it was a dog, this doesn't explain what happened with the scorch marks, which again can be seen to this very day. There have also been several other recorded sightings of the Black Shuck in East Anglia, with Littleport also being a suggested stomping ground of the villainous Black Mutt. Some even say that, to this day, the Black Shuck stealths around the roads of East Anglia, biding its time and patiently waiting to strike again. Since 1945 though, not a single soul has seen the Black Shuck, or at least live to tell the tale. The Ratman of Southend is an urban legend originating in, as the name would suggest, Southend-on-Sea in Essex, one of the UK's most recent places to be given city status. So there are actually two stories, both called the Ratman of Southend. I guess there's like a lot of Ratmen over there, at least two. So my story of the Ratman tells of an old homeless man seeking shelter from the cold in an underpass when he was despicably targeted by a group of wrong-uns, a bunch of scallywags, and viciously beaten to a pulp. Cold and alone, the homeless man was quickly losing blood. To make matters worse, as he died, the numerous vermin who inhabited the area gathered. Later, when his body was found, it was clear that his face had been completely devoured by ravenous rats. Now, nobody knows why or how this could even be possible, but some locals swear that after these events, a ghostly figure was spotted in the underpass, with people hearing rat-like squealing and scraping, as if large claws were moving across the walls. This story would have taken place more recently, and as far as I could find online, there were no reported deaths by murder in underpasses in Southend, whereby the victim was eaten by rats, but you never know, maybe this thing could have been a cover-up or something. Maybe it was too ghoulish to tell the public. Who really knows? So we've been talking today a lot about culture, and I personally think there's no better way to understand a country's culture really than their food. So I actually have a few different select food items that have a bit of culture or folklore behind them, and I'm going to be trying them out and telling you about them really. So I'm going to start with this. Pickled onion monster munch. Absolute British classic. This is the pinnacle of the British crisp game. I mean, these guys are absolutely delicious. I know it sounds mental, right? But pickled onion monster munch is S tier. It's top tier British snack. It just is. And basically the folklore behind this is that some people think that it's, some people think that it's meant to be like a monster claw. And then other people think that it's meant to be a monster if you kind of tip it upside down. It's got the little legs and the long arms. To be honest, I just wanted an excuse to buy these because they are so good. I could devour a pack of these if I'm drunk. If you're ever in the United Kingdom, you have to grab a bag. I'm not sure how transferable the taste is. It seems to me like it's a very acquired British taste because we like that kind of pickled stuff. And also a fair warning, if you eat enough of these, the skin of the insides of your cheeks will be acided off. They are completely they're acidic, these guys. But they are so good. I mean, oh god, they're going everywhere. So yeah, what do you think? Is it meant to be a monster claw, or is it meant to be a monster when you turn it upside down? I don't know, I don't think they've ever given the answer, but I think most people agree it's meant to be the claw, right? It's got to be the claw. Save that for later. So to wash that down, what better than a nice cup of tea, which, to be honest, isn't really my personal forte. I'm not massive on tea, but very calming when I have a cup of tea. I'm usually sick if I'm having a cup of tea, to be honest. The culture behind this is what makes a good cup of tea. And as someone who worked in a coffee shop for 3 years, I think I'm at least a little bit qualified to say what makes a good tea. So firstly, and this is the biggie, water before milk. If you put in milk before water, you won't know how much of each you need. You put your water in first, and then you put milk in to decide what colour it goes. At the end of the day, colour is king when it comes to tea. You want a really nice kind of mid-brown. At least I think that's the best. Some people like a builder's tea where it's a bit more strong. Some people like a really milky tea. I like to go straight down the middle. I think it's best. Bit of best of both worlds. And this right here, I don't know if you can see it, is probably the ideal colour. I think I've got footage here, but this is probably the ideal colour for a tea. Nice mid-brown, not too milky, not too strong. Please do put milk in your tea. It's a bit barbaric when someone just chucks in a tea bag and no milk or whatever. It's crazy. And lastly, and this one's probably going to be a bit controversial, we have the crisp sandwich. Now I need to preface this by saying not every crisp goes in a crisp sandwich. If you were to put a packet of pickled onion monster munch in a crisp sandwich, that would be lunacy, it would be blasphemy, you would get pariahed out of the United Kingdom, out of the Commonwealth, to be honest. When it comes to a crisp sandwich, it has to be white bread, or at the very least like a 50-50. You cannot have seeded crisp sandwich, no way. Generally go with white bread. Now, crisp choice is extremely important, as I just discussed a second ago. Generally, it has to be Walker's or McCoy's. Skips in a crisp sandwich is a no-go. Wotsits, you should actually go seek some help if you're putting Wotsits in your crisp sandwich. That is just vile. So, I've gone for here, salt and vinegar. It's a very, I guess maybe even a British flavour, I don't really know. We tend to like our tangy kind of flavours, I'd say. Probably the unhealthiest sandwich you can have, but, you know, it's delicious. It's just straight up delicious. Because you can have different types. You can have ready salted. You can have salt and vinegar. You can have cheese and onion. So many different things to play around with. Do you go for McCoy's? Do you go for Walker's? I would personally say Walker's for me are probably my favourite to have in a crisp sandwich, and then McCoy's if it's not a if you're just eating a bag of crisps, I'd rather go McCoy's, but if I'm eating a crisp sandwich, I'll usually go Walker's. Today I've gone McCoy's. Let's tuck in. That's what I call British culture. So yeah, I'm kind of cheating for this next one because it doesn't take place in the United Kingdom, it actually takes place in the Republic of Ireland. This is the Dobhar-chú, otherwise known as King Otter. And there's a bit of debate around what creature this thing is. As I said, its name is King Otter, but some people believe that it resembles something much closer to a dog. Some people even think that it's half dog, half fish. The reason that some people think this is because yes, it lives in water, but it's also been reported to be quite hairy, not dissimilar to an otter. But by looking at pictures online, it also does look to have the features of a canine. So if I were to describe this thing's appearance, the physical description of the Dobhar-chú resembles an otter, but it's about 5 times as large, perhaps 10 to 15 feet, with a white pelt, black ear tips, and a black cross on its back. Though, due to the murky waters that it's said to reside in, its pelt may be portrayed as darker than it actually is. So to me, this might be one of the most interesting creatures whose existence is unconfirmed out there. Because you might be skeptical of this creature, and let me pique your suspicion by saying this. If you were to fly over to Ireland, if you were to go over to Mayo and you headed to Cornwall Cemetery in Glendale, you will actually find the grave of a Grace McLaughlin. And what's fascinating about her place of rest, which is located just south of the Northern Irish border, is her headstone. For you see, apparently her headstone tells the tale of a woman killed by the Dobhar-chú all the way back in the 17th century. The tale goes that her husband supposedly heard her scream as she was washing her clothes down at Glendale Lock and came to her aid. When he got there though, she was already dead, with the Dobhar-chú upon her bloody and mutilated body. The man killed the Dobhar-chú, stabbing it in the heart. As it died, it made a whistling noise and its mate arose from the lock. It chased the man, but after a long and bloody battle, he killed the other Dobhar-chú as well. The question now remains, could at some point the Dobhar-chú have existed? Does it still exist today? This reminds me of the Axolotl in the Mexican Urban Legends video, where hundreds of years ago someone said that it existed, and because it lives underwater we really don't know what's going on under there. Maybe it has become extinct ever since, which is why we haven't seen it. It's a possibility. Could it exist now? Could it have gone extinct hundreds of years ago? It's just something to think about. For fans of the paranormal, look no further than 50 Bekerley Square, which at a point in time was known as one of the most haunted places in the entirety of London. The origins of this tale is that it's said that a young woman back in the 1800s committed suicide in there, and her spirit now haunts the house. The spirit is said to take the form of a brown mist, though sometimes it's reported as a white figure. Now, there are some alternative versions of this story. One was that a young man was locked in the attic room, fed only through a hole in the door until he eventually went mad and died. Another story is that the attic room is haunted by the ghost of a little girl who was killed there by a sadistic servant. Believe in them or not, one thing is for sure, that each of these stories agree that something strange is afoot in the residence of 50 Bekerley Square. Now, around the time that the townhouse became famous for its mystery, it was owned by a man of the name Thomas Myers. And legend has it that he was rejected by his fiancée, and so he locked himself inside his residence for years, growing ever more mad and deranged by the day until he died in 1874 at the age of 76. During his time at the house, he allowed it to become more dilapidated, and this is where many believe that the rumours began. Even still, this wouldn't explain the story of George Littleton, the aristocrat and conservative politician who stayed there in 1872. He stayed there a single night for a dare, and he says that he fired upon a ghostly apparition with a shotgun that he had brought to the townhouse. Furthermore, in 1879, a piece in the Mayfair magazine alleged that a maid who had stayed in the attic room had been found mad and died in an asylum days after. It was also alleged that after a nobleman had spent a night in the attic room, he was so paralysed with fear that he could not speak. The tales don't end there though, because 8 years later in 1887, it was alleged that 2 sailors from the HMS Penelope stayed a night in the house. By morning, one was found dead, having tripped as he ran from the house. The other reported having seen the ghost of Myers approaching them aggressively. Since the 1930s, there have been no more strange tellings of apparitions found at 50 Bekerley Street. Some people believe that whatever was haunting the place has moved on to a new life. But some people still say that if you listen closely at the dead of night, you might be able to hear sounds of trapped souls in a building most terrifying to believers of the paranormal. So this next story is absolutely wild. This might be one of the wildest stories I have ever told. If, for whatever reason, you feel like you cannot handle the intense subject matter that's about to come up, please skip ahead. We're going to be talking... Actually, I'm not even going to spoil it. It's mental, but it's very mature. It's pretty f***ed up, so please skip ahead if you don't really feel like delving into something super messed up right now. Don't say I didn't warn you, this is about to get dark. So, off the coast of the United Kingdom, there's a little island called Guernsey, best known for being the birthplace of Rotorshore from the Sidemen and for everyone dodging tax. Now, for such a small island, it actually has a very rich history, but let's take things back to the 1550s and witch trials were going on all over the world, and on this small island, it was no different. So there were these three women, Gilmine Gilbert and Peritine Massey, who were sisters, and their mother, Catherine Corchers, who in 1556 were accused of stealing a goblet for which they were found not guilty. Now, the UK has traditionally been a Protestant country except for a few years in the early 1500s. As it turns out, these three women were Protestant, not Catholic, which was the style at the time. And so, despite not being guilty of what they were accused of, they were said to be burnt at the stake when something unimaginable happened. One of the women, Peritine Massey, was actually pregnant at the time, something that I believe was not disclosed. At least it's argued that she did not disclose it. Having said that, she was reportedly heavily pregnant, so I kind of feel like she wouldn't have to. If you're like 8 months pregnant, 9 months pregnant, you can probably see where I'm going with this. They popped the woman on the stake, and in an unimaginably cruel twist of fate, Peritine Massey actually gives birth at the stake whilst being burnt alive. So she gives birth, baby falls into the flames, which to be honest isn't fair, spawn killing is never nice. It's saved by a person who takes the baby out and lays it on the grass. But then someone else grabs the newborn and gives it to the bailiff, who is the head of state of Guernsey to my knowledge. Now the year is 1556, we haven't discovered empathy yet, so yeah, they throw it back in. They throw a newborn baby back into the flames, call it a day. Yeah, the people of Guernsey are mad. What the fuck is even going on over there? So this next one is super interesting. Let me know if you've heard of it before in the comments if you're from the UK, because I know for one, I have not. This is a legend about the ravens at the Tower of London. So people all around the world know the Tower of London. It's had many uses over the past 1,000 years, but the most famous of which is that it was used as a prison between the years 1100 and 1952. Now, if you were to go to the top of the Tower of London, you might see some ravens, and this is because there are intentionally a number of ravens that reside in the tower. The number is generally between 6 and 10. But there have been multiple exceptions throughout history, and the reason behind this is that there is a superstition that if each of the tower's ravens go missing, die, or fly away, the crown will fall and Britain with it. For this reason, the raven is actually now a symbol of British monarchy. The superstition has been held since the 1880s, and since then there have always been a number of captive ravens in the Tower of London. The closest we've ever had to them all dying or disappearing was in 1944. Before that we had 6, which is the usual default number. However, 3 died due to bombing or perhaps stress, and 2 disappeared, leaving a single raven named Pauline. This is where the superstition that the United Kingdom would fall with the ravens is thought to have come from. But Winston Churchill soon requested more ravens to be brought to the tower. Today, there are 9 ravens that reside in the Tower of London: Jubilee, Harris, Grip, Rocky, Erin, Poppy, Georgie, Edgar and Branwen. And they can each be identified with a coloured band on one of their legs, telling you which one is which. Ravens in captivity in the tower grounds have had lifespans of over 40 years, and so if you're ever in the UK and you want to see one of these birds, you're in no rush. I just thought that was an interesting superstition to share. So this next one, I'm kind of upset that I can't actually go visit it. It's very near to where I live. It's called Devil's Dyke in the South Downs in Sussex, but the problem is I only found out like this week that it would take me 2 hours hours to get to, but either way, it has a spellbinding tale. So to understand this story, I have to give you a little history lesson about Great Britain. I hope you've learnt it in school, but in case you haven't, before the Normans conquered our island nation in 1066, it was repeatedly conquered by various different groups, including the Vikings, the Romans, and the Anglo-Saxons. By the way, Anglo, Anglia, England is where we get our name from, at least this part of the United Kingdom. Now, the Saxons were very superstitious and believed in elves, goblins, and dragons, creatures that have been at the heart of our folklore for thousands of years. But the Anglo-Saxons came from like the Germanic region, and they believed in old Germanic gods such as Tiw, Woden, and Frigg. Now, the Saxons brought with them their gods to the shores of Britain, but in the late 500s, Pope Gregory the Great wanted Britain to convert to Christianity. So he sent a man who would soon be known as Augustine of Canterbury to the island to convert people. He was the first Archbishop of Canterbury, a tradition that has been going on for thousands of years now. So over the next 100 years or so, people throughout the UK would convert to Christianity instead of the old Anglo-Saxon gods. All of them except for Sussex in the southeast. Eventually, in the 680s, Sussex did convert to Christianity though, and this is where the tale of Devil's Dyke comes in, because the story is that the devil was so angry that he lost his last stronghold in the UK, because obviously he's not going to like Christianity, that he decided to build Devil's Dyke to kill the people of Sussex. He planned to exterminate its inhabitants by digging a trench through the South Downs so that the sea would flood through it and drown the people of Sussex. And this is where a man known today as Saint Cuthman of Steyning would make a deal with the devil. And the deal was that if the devil was able to build his dyke in a single night, then he could have Cuthman of Steyning's soul. But if he couldn't, then he would have to leave the people of Sussex alone forever. The devil accepted the wager and began work that night. But Cuthman had a plan. In the early hours of the morning, before the sun had risen, he displayed a lit candle in his window while also startling a cockerel so that it would start crowing in alarm. The light and the sound of the cockerel crowing convinced the devil that dawn was about to break, and thus he had lost his wager with Cuthman. He therefore ran away in disgrace, and by the time that he realised that he hadn't lost the wager yet, that it wasn't day yet, it was too late. He therefore left behind the unfinished trench, henceforth known as Devil's Dyke. A really badass name and a really great place to have a picnic if you can stomach the hike. So there we have it. That is my last story today, and before you click off, hit the subscribe button please. I'm so close to 50,000, it would be great to get there. Hit like as well, that always helps me in the algorithm, and we also have Instagram, Twitter, Patreon and Discord. All the links are in the description. Thank you guys very much for watching. Apart from that, please let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see me do next, because I'm only 111 videos in and I'm already out of ideas. Thank you for watching.